Okay, dear guests, please take your seats. I'd like to welcome you to this breakout session. This is about AMR control in food producing animals. Following the thread from the morning, we'll go on from here. Please take the seats in the front rows. A lot of people are connected online, I'm sure. Unless you'd like to drop out during the session, if you're a good student, you sit in the front. In the morning, we had two master professors, experts, who talked about AMR in animals. In the afternoon, we have a whole session about AMR control in food producing animals. There will be 6 speakers who will share with us AMR control in animals. It's a great honor to be here. I have a co-chairperson, Director Li Fengqin from China National Center for Food Safety Risk Assessment. I will be moderating the first part, and Dr. Li will be moderating at the second part of this session. The first speaker will be a speaker who has given us a presentation in the morning. He's an official for Asia Pacific for OIE, is Lisa Thompson, and so Dr. Lisa Thompson will join us online. So the topic is about OIE instruments on the use of antimicrobials in animals. It's a very practical topic. So Lisa.
Thank you very much indeed. Nice to be back again. Let me just share my slides for you. Okay, there we go, great. So this time I'm going to be talking a little bit more about the OIE and what we are trying to do to help our members to use antimicrobials in animals better. So first I'll just reflect quickly again on my last slide from this morning, talking about One Health, and there will be some aspects of this that I'll touch on, how we need to work together collaboratively when we're addressing issues, not just zoonotic diseases, which I think is what everyone most often think of, but also on things like AMR, where we're concerned about issues that are crossing boundaries. So let me just start then with talking a little bit about the tripartite. So this is the FAO, OIE, WHO collaboration. I'm sure you're very familiar with all of these organizations. So FAO is global leader for food and agriculture. The OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, is a global leader for animal health and welfare standards. And the World Health Organization is a global leader for human health. But we do have joint priorities that include antimicrobial resistance. The WHO Global Action Plan was developed in close collaboration with FAO and OIE. Also, we have National Action Plan development support tools, so a manual for developing national action plans and a checklist to be used to assist with the development of NAPs. We also have a lot of communication tools, so I think awareness is key, particularly with antimicrobial resistance, which is still a little bit of a faceless pandemic. We have joint media statements, we celebrate Antimicrobial Awareness Week together, and we also have common trainings and presentations. So then thinking a little bit about the areas that we overlap and where we've worked together. So FAO action plans on antimicrobial resistance will focus a lot on awareness, on evidence and practices and governance. The Global Action Plan from WHO focuses on information, education and training, surveillance, monitoring, record keeping, reduction of infection, legislation, optimization of use, and sustainable investment for alternatives and reduced use. And as I mentioned, the OIE strategy, which is on antimicrobial resistance and the prudent use of antimicrobials, and focuses on 4 of those. So improving awareness, strengthening knowledge, encouraging implementation of standards, and also supporting good governance and capacity building. So this strategy was launched in November 2016, and as I mentioned, it's aligned with the WHO plan and the tripartite partnership. There are 4 main objectives, so I'll just talk a little bit more in detail about each of these because they really do explain our goal from the OIE. Oh, excuse me. So the first one is to improve awareness and understanding. We aim to support member countries through developing targeted communications and advocacy materials, promoting awareness of antimicrobial resistance through veterinary statutory bodies and veterinary education establishments. And this is to really encourage a professional culture among veterinarians and paraveterinarians that supports responsible and ethical use of antimicrobials in animals. Also, we will continue to support professional development goals by conducting various trainings, so workshops and conferences that promote prudent use of antimicrobials and also address the issue of AMR. We will also expand the portfolio of OIE guidance, education and scientific reference materials, and these are then available as a library for our members, and any member of the public can access these. And obviously collaborating with WHO and FAO and other organizations as appropriate to ensure alignment and coordination of policy and advocacy initiatives. Number 2 is to strengthen knowledge through surveillance and research. And we really want to support member countries in developing and implementing monitoring and surveillance systems, to build and maintain a database for collecting data. So I mentioned this a little bit this morning. We want to record data on the use of antimicrobial agents in food producing and also companion animals. And we will analyze that data and produce an annual report. We want to enhance the development, use and functionality of WAHIS. So this is the World Animal Health Information System. This is an online system where members can submit information, particularly about diseases. And this will allow us to also analyze data on antimicrobial use. We will continue to guide and support research into alternatives to antibiotics. I think everyone is aware that we can't rely on just antibiotics or other antimicrobials for the health of animals and people. So we want to encourage development and uptake of new tools, products and methodologies. Another key item that I think everyone at this particular conference is aware of is the need to focus on public-private partnerships. And there are a lot of opportunities where we can pursue these partnerships in AMR research and risk management, and that obviously is also an important issue. Number 3 is to support good governance and capacity building. So we, as I mentioned before, we will assist member countries to develop and implement national action plans, promoting a One Health approach. So hopefully those plans will be multi-sectoral in their, not only their planning, but also their implementation. We will help to provide tools and guidance to assist the members in their AMR risk assessment initiatives. And we will ensure that veterinary services have the capacity to implement OIE international standards. And this is primarily through our PVS pathway, which is a pathway for assessing veterinary services members. So we will support also legislation within members, so developing and modernizing legislation covering areas such as manufacture, marketing authorization, importation and distribution, and also use of veterinary products. We have a number of focal points. So each member has a focal point for veterinary products, and we provide regular training for these focal points on various issues relating to veterinary product use and antimicrobial resistance. And we will ensure that we have well-trained veterinarians and veterinary paraprofessionals that are really very much involved in national efforts. Number 4 in the objectives of this strategy is to encourage implementation of OIE standards. For those of you who aren't aware, the OIE standards are based on the most up-to-date scientific knowledge, and these standards are developed by experts, but then they are approved by all the members at the general session each year. So these are really developed by the members for the members. And we will also disseminate and encourage adoption of recommendations. I mentioned this morning the WHO list of critical antimicrobials, critically important antimicrobials. And similarly, we have a list of antimicrobials of veterinary importance. We will strengthen multilateral support for implementing the standards among policy makers, and also build on the success of the standards development work program to continue to advance animal sectors and our comprehensive framework of quality science-based standards that are supporting the Global Action Plan. And again, to continue to collaborate with WHO and FAO to support aligned framework of standards and guidelines where we have that crossover between human health, animal health, agriculture, and the food chain. So what are the challenges for veterinary services? The first thing we need to consider is the capacity of veterinary services. They need to be able to build sustainable, robust plans and policies to combat AMR, and also to ensure prudent use of antimicrobial agents, and hand in hand with that, good animal husbandry. So therefore, it's important to have legislation and regulatory systems for veterinary medicines to ensure that they are registered and have ensured quality, and that they are monitored so that compliance in that registration and those use are monitored, and also adverse reactions recorded so that we know that we have high quality of drugs and that we're avoiding use of these counterfeits or falsified agents. And I mentioned before that we would really support veterinary services to collect data on antimicrobial use, because that's really important for us whenever we're informing policy. And we want to regulate and educate on prudent use of antimicrobials. And this means both veterinarians and other trained personnel, so paraprofessionals. And we want to make sure that they understand how to use antimicrobials appropriately. And to follow on from that, we need to be able to have surveillance for these resistant organisms, and that means sampling on farms, in animal feeds, along the food chain. So we need to have laboratory capacity and also good data management. So these are just some of the issues that are often problems and challenges faced by veterinary services. So I mentioned very briefly the OIE standards. So just look at those standards and guidelines that are relevant to antimicrobial resistance. In the Terrestrial Animal Health Code, there is a mention in the introductory chapter on recommendations for controlling antimicrobial resistance. So this is chapter 6. Then harmonization of surveillance and monitoring programs, monitoring quantities and usage patterns of the agents in food-producing animals, and obviously responsible and prudent use of antimicrobial agents. Also, it's important to think about risk analysis when it's appropriate to use some of those antimicrobials that are on the list of antimicrobials of veterinary importance. The Aquatic Animal Health Code obviously focuses on aquaculture, but again, the principles are the same. We're looking for responsible and prudent use of antimicrobial agents, monitoring of the agents that are used in these species, and also surveillance and monitoring programs and risk analysis again. The Manual of Diagnostic Tests and Vaccines also includes various laboratory methodologies for bacterial antimicrobial susceptibility testing. So the OIE list of antimicrobial agents of veterinary importance. Some of these are critically important for humans. So fluoroquinolones, third and fourth generation cephalosporins, and colistin. So I think this was already mentioned, unfortunately, and colistin is still used in some countries as an agent for growth promotion. But these agents on the OIE list of antimicrobials of importance should not be used as preventative treatment in feed or water in the absence of clinical signs. They should not be used as a first-line treatment unless it is justified or based on bacteriological tests. Extra-label or off-label use should be limited and reserved only if no alternatives are available. And as I mentioned, they should be prohibited for use as growth promoters. So we need to really see these agents as a very precious commodity that we should protect. So just I'll touch a little bit more on the OIE global database on antimicrobial agents intended for use in animals. I talked a lot this morning about some of the figures that have come out in the latest report, but I'll just give a little bit more background on how this database is formed. So I mentioned that we've been collecting the data for quite a while now. So the fifth round report was published in April this year, but actually the sixth round has already been launched. So we're now collecting data for the next report. You'll notice that there's a little bit of variation between when the data is submitted and when the data is appropriate for. So which dates you'll notice. So for the fifth round, data ranged from 2017 to 2019, but we were collecting from the year 2019 to 2020. So just trying to fill in the gaps, because obviously it can take a while for some of this data to be collected, and we're trying to compile and share as much of that information as we can. So what happens is that the member countries will provide us with some baseline information on their situation relating to antimicrobial agents. And then there are three reporting options on top of that. In the first option, the only information provided will be the overall amount of antimicrobials sold for or used in animals by antimicrobial class. And there is the possibility to separate by type of use. For the second option, we will have this overall amount by antimicrobial class, but we have the possibility to separate by type of use and also by species group. And the third level of reporting, we will have this information, so the overall amount sold for or used in animals, with the possibility to separate by type of use, species group, and also route of administration. So this would obviously let us know whether it was an in-feed or water or injectable, for example, administration. And this is the type of data that we're getting. So you'll see that we have, this is information just for this region, so Asia and the Pacific. Reporting option 1, if you remember, we're getting the type of antimicrobials that are used and the overall amount, but not very much other information. And reporting option 2, which is in green, we will also get some information about the type of species. And reporting option number 3, we'll also get more detail about the route of administration. And you'll notice that we are slowly improving. So we're getting more reports submitted and of higher quality. So I think the last round, we obviously were a little bit affected by the COVID pandemic and the ability to collect some of the data. Everyone was very busy. I showed this graph earlier as well, really just to remind you that unfortunately in this region we have a really high amount of antimicrobial use. So the y-axis just shows the milligrams of antimicrobial agent per kilogram of animal biomass. And on the x-axis there, you've got by region, and you can see that in this region, we are almost double the global consumption, which is around 107 milligrams per kilogram of animal biomass. I again touched briefly on this morning about antimicrobial growth promoters that are used in animals. And as I said, unfortunately, this pink number shows that we do have a number of members in this region who are still using antimicrobial growth promoters. So I've mentioned some of the problems, some of the issues, and some of the data, but what are we doing to actually support our members to address these challenges? Obviously, we've got overarching tripartite support, and this is really using a One Health approach to combat AMR. Then we have some OIE specific proposal objectives. So the OIE standards on prudent use of antimicrobials are being updated and revised. As I mentioned, we have this global database on the use of antimicrobials in animals, and that will continue to be an annual collection of data and reporting. We have improved awareness and understanding of AMR and alternatives is really a key objective where we're trying to reach as many stakeholders as we can. So I've mentioned the veterinary services, but also we want to not forget everyone else who's involved in manufacturing and using these agents. So everyone from manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies, through to farmers, to politicians. And the members will also be putting in place appropriate legislative frameworks and will help to monitor their progress and compliance with OIE standards. And again, we will help to improve intersectoral collaboration regarding antimicrobial resistance. What kind of investments do we need to do to achieve those, to overcome those challenges? So for capacity of veterinary services, I mentioned this performance of veterinary services pathway. So we have various missions to assess what the level of veterinary services is in a country. We also have the WHO and OIE national bridging workshops, and these are linking the OIE's PVS pathway results with WHO's international health regulations results. So we know that there are quite a lot of common ground is included in those, and so we will have multi-sectoral workshops to assess those. And also now FAO is becoming more involved in these workshops. We also try to share best practices and experiences at the sub-regional and regional level, and this can either be on our website or also at some of the training that we arrange. For legislation and regulatory systems for veterinary medicines, we do have a veterinary legislation support program, which again will help to assess the current legislation in a program. So this will be an expert mission, and then to help support the country to develop their legislation, or perhaps just to support implementation of already existing legislation. And also it's important that we have communication and advocacy, including development of guidelines for these systems. We try to help with data on antimicrobial use. So the OIE focal points for veterinary products will help share that data. They will share it with us. We will share it with those collecting data for the report. So the focal points and their colleagues will have support, and hopefully they will be progressing on the reporting options. So we will be helping them to collect more data so that we can go from perhaps a reporting option 1 to option 2 or even 3. We also need to work a little bit on estimating the level of animal biomass. This obviously needs a little bit of refinement. It's difficult to count every single animal in a country, and so there is some estimation involved, but we are working on improving that. And also enhancing the online data system of WAHES to, as I said, include antimicrobial resistance information. For prudent use of antimicrobials by veterinarians and paraprofessionals, we have the OIE Veterinary Education Twinning Program. So this helps some veterinary education establishments to improve their system. So depending on what their needs are, this might be, for example, to help improve their curriculum or their teaching capabilities, or making sure that they're covering some of the competencies that are in the OIE guidelines. There are guidelines for veterinary paraprofessionals and also first day veterinarians. And we will really be focusing on advocacy and communication with these stakeholders. For laboratory capacity, we also have twinning projects for laboratories. And again, these will help to support specific activities within the laboratories. And finally, to have effective coordinated governance and sustainable financing. I'm sure that's something everyone wants. For the national and international effort, there is also an ad hoc interagency coordination group from FAO, OIE and WHO, which reports to the United Nations General Assembly. So I think everyone knows that communication is really important, and one of the key times for that for AMR is World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. So this is from the 18th to the 24th of November, and you can see that there's lots of information available, lots of communication materials that we can use around this time and throughout the rest of the year. So everything from fact sheets and posters to videos and scientific publications. Key to the OIE's communication materials are these 5 only rules. So giving an idea of when you should use antimicrobials. So only use antimicrobials when associated with good animal health care. So not replacing good husbandry with use of antimicrobials. Only use when needed. So we don't need to use antimicrobials for every infection. Only use antimicrobials that you obtain from authorized sources and retailers. So thinking about the quality of antimicrobials here. And ideally, we want to have antimicrobials only prescribed by a veterinarian. So trying to, again, build that into the regulations in different countries. And finally, I think this is something perhaps people themselves need to also be aware of, to follow the dosage and follow the length of treatment and withdrawal period as prescribed. So obviously not just for veterinary drugs, but also for human treatments too. So there are a number of these that have been prepared into posters, also videos and various social media images. But what about the regional situation? Obviously, things are a little bit different in the region, and we can use a lot of the materials, and a lot of the standards are very relevant wherever you are in the world. But we do have some specifics for the Asian Pacific region. So the current situation is that we have weak legislations and enforcements to regulate import, production, sale, monitoring of antimicrobials. So this is a situation in a lot of countries, not every single country in the region, but in a lot. There also is inadequate supervision on the usage of antimicrobials in animals. As you saw earlier, many of the members are still using antimicrobial growth promoters without risk analysis. There is a weak antimicrobial resistance surveillance system and lack of awareness. And what happens is then we have maybe weak legislations lead to quality issues, and we have a lot of over-the-counter sale rather than by prescription. And if we have inadequate supervision, maybe we get inappropriate use or incomplete treatment or underdosing even. Also, perhaps we have a lack of data. If we're not doing the surveillance, we won't have that data to support actions and policy decisions. And also not be able to fully face up to the impact that AMR will have, and by these issues, we're then going to increase antimicrobial resistance. So we have a lot of the materials that I mentioned earlier are available in various languages, and these are all available on the website. So again, trying to reach different stakeholders usually means that we need to have the message available in an accessible manner. We do have a dedicated page on our regional OIE website for antimicrobial resistance. And in particular, this has a lot of information, not just about the awareness materials, but also activities. So we have some in-country workshops on monitoring quantities and usage patterns of antimicrobial agents, various seminars on containment for different stakeholders like veterinary education establishments and livestock and aquaculture industries. Also some training on the database that I mentioned, and reviewing implementation of action plans. World Antimicrobial Awareness Week, obviously we try to support each year. So last year we had a series of webinars on communication skills, and then one specifically for aquatic animals, one for companion animals. We also support the member countries. So for example, with translation and printing of some materials, and we have a regional tripartite webinar. So just so that you know, it's coming up, we are having a tripartite plus UNEP webinar, and this will be on the 24th of November, so right at the end of World Antimicrobial Awareness Week. The title is Spread Awareness, Stop Resistance, and it will talk about AMR journeys and stories from AMR champions in Asia. I hope as many of you as possible can join. This is a free event, and it's open to anyone who's interested. We also have some short videos that have been prepared in the region. These are available also in Chinese on the website. I mentioned some of the workshops to try to understand how antimicrobial agents are used in a number of different countries. And this is a kind of example of what we'll get. So we want to understand where do the antimicrobial agents come from, where they're manufactured, how are they sold, who sells them, who buys them, where are they used. And you can see very soon it gets quite complicated. And this obviously means that collecting antimicrobial use data can be complicated as well. So it's important for us to understand this to help the veterinary services to know which where they can get various data from, and if they have fairly good regulations, then maybe they can also get information from, for example, importers and manufacturers. But we do find that at the level of distribution and retailers, it's often quite difficult to get that information. So we often end up with data that's mostly from importers and manufacturers, and that's what feeds into the global database. So again, just a reminder that we've achieved this in a number of countries, and hopefully, unfortunately this year we weren't able to hold any of the workshops, but hopefully from next year we will be able to start again. I mentioned speaking to veterinarians, so veterinary education establishments and veterinary statutory bodies, and also the seminars for livestock and aquaculture industries, trying to engage more with the industry as well, so that we can encourage good farming practices and enhance biosecurity and improving other aspects of husbandry. The FAO OIE has a coordination group of leading AMR institutions in Asia and the Pacific, and these institutions are all involved in AMR, and they have developed a regional work plan on capacity building and related initiatives to assist other institutions across the region. Also, we provide some laboratory training, so we will have our OIE Collaborating Centre will have visiting guests who will be able to be trained in various AMR techniques. Just finally, in conclusion, I would just like to say that the OIE, both the regional representation for Asia and the Pacific and the sub-regional representation for Southeast Asia, will continue to support the implementation of the OIE strategy on AMR. And really our key theme here is responsible and prudent use of antimicrobials. We will work closely with partners such as FAO, WHO, and UNEP, as well as leading AMR institutions. And let's not forget to make bridges across sectors. So we know that antimicrobial resistance is affecting all aspects of animal health, human health, and also the environment and wildlife. So we need to really think in a One Health manner. Thank you very much for your attention.
This is a great presentation. In the interest of time, we'll go on with the next one. And these are from different countries' reps. The first one is from the US and the second one is from Germany. On behalf of FDA US is Mr. Donna Prata, is Associate Commissioner for Imported Food Safety of US FDA. Over the years, he's been in charge of this animal management of antimicrobial and etc.
Very good. It's nice to be with you today. So thank you very much for the kind invitation to join. And I'm happy to share some new information about what we're doing on science and policy with respect to antimicrobial resistance in the United States. So I'm going to try to share my screen. Okay. Okay, very good. So as Dr. Chen mentioned, I'm Don Prater. I'm a veterinarian at the United States Food and Drug Administration. In my regular job, I work on imported food safety, but I've also been quite engaged over the years with our efforts on antimicrobial resistance, and in particular, working in some of the international and multilateral venues. So today, I hope to share some information with you generally about what we're doing with respect to antimicrobial resistance. Then I'll talk a little bit more specifically about what we're doing with food producing animals and some of the new concept papers that we published over the past year. And then finally, I'm going to make a few remarks about the Codex Alimentarius Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance. So in that venue, I've been chairing an electronic working group on the code of practice to minimize and contain antimicrobial resistance. So that's what I hope to do in the time that we have together today. So let me go to the next slide. So as many of you know, what's the reason we're all here and talking about antimicrobial resistance? It has a high public health impact. So in the United States, according to our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are at least 2.8 million antibiotic resistant infections, and more than 35,000 people actually die as a result of those infections. So this is a very important topic. It's one that is quite persistent. Of course, we've had lots of efforts going on over the past year or so with other types of things, but antimicrobial resistance remains one of the biggest public health challenges that we have. And so, of course, as you heard from the last presenter, that combating antimicrobial resistance requires multifaceted efforts, both in the human healthcare and veterinary sectors. So this slide describes a little bit about FDA's role and our strategic approach to antimicrobial resistance. So overall, some of the areas in which we're interested in working is facilitating efficient product development. We still continue to have a need to develop new antimicrobials, diagnostic tests, vaccines as well. And so we're helping to continue to develop and foster efficient product development. As well, we're working on promoting the appropriate and responsible use of antimicrobials. And so you'll hear me talk a little bit about some of our stewardship efforts. And in particular, we work on disseminating information to promote different interventions, risk mitigation strategies, and to help slow the development of resistance. Another area, very important, is supporting the development and enhancement of tools for conducting surveillance of both antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance. This is important so that stakeholders can better track, treat, and respond to AMR outbreaks. So you heard from Dr. Thompson about some of the efforts that OIE is working on in this area. And indeed, in the United States at the national level, we also have surveillance systems, both for antimicrobial resistance and antimicrobial use. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about some of those. And then finally, as part of our overall approach, we're very interested and continue to advance regulatory science. So this is the science where we develop tools and standards to facilitate translation of those important breakthroughs in science and technology and help convert them into safe and effective medical products. So following those four areas, what are some of the things we do on product development? Well, FDA works closely with our product sponsors. We also work with other government agencies to facilitate product development and address antimicrobial resistance. We're working on developing new antimicrobial drugs, also vaccines and biologics. We employ a product development program, and in some cases, we incentivize the development of some of these new antimicrobials. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those programs that we're working on the human side. We also encourage the development of novel and non-traditional products and look at different tools and alternatives to antimicrobials. In addition, we work on in vitro diagnostic devices for detection of AMR-associated microbial pathogens. So very important there as well. So I mentioned antimicrobial stewardship. We'll talk a little bit today, of course, in this section about what we're doing with food-producing animals. Veterinary stewardship of antimicrobials is incredibly important. This helps to provide guidance for the responsible and prudent use of these antimicrobials. We also have a distinction I'll talk about called medically important antimicrobials. So our veterinary stewardship areas are led by FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine. And so at the FDA, we have a number of centers. So we have centers for human products, the medical products, for human drugs, devices, biologics. But we also have our Center for Veterinary Medicine. And this is the center that publishes the stewardship guidelines, and they have outlined some goals in their 5-year plan. So I would encourage you to come and take a look on our website about the 5-year plan to learn more about some of those veterinary stewardship activities. On the human health side, we also work on stewardship, and we talk about appropriate labeling. We work on clinical trial design, antimicrobial resistance, antimicrobial susceptibility testing, interpretive criteria. We also are working on facilitating biomarkers and other types of regulatory approaches to the rapid identification of bacterial pathogens. So I mentioned surveillance and monitoring of antimicrobial use and resistance. So FDA works in close coordination with our interagency partners and our domestic stakeholders to collect the data necessary to conduct surveillance and monitoring of antimicrobial use and resistance. One of the programs that we have for collecting data on antimicrobial resistance is called the National Antimicrobial Resistance Monitoring Program. We work together with our colleagues at CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, and we collect information on human clinical isolates, on retail meat, so certain types of retail meat, chicken, turkeys, cattle, and swine. And then more recently, collecting information even on some companion animals as part of some pilot projects. We do this in certain ways in cooperation with our different stakeholders and interagency. And then we publish reports. And so we have our NARMS report that we publish online. We also, and actually in our NARMS report, we have some data visualization tools that are pretty neat. You can go there and actually parse some of the data and generate reports in real time. We also publish an annual report on the amount of antimicrobial drugs sold or distributed for use in food-producing animals. And then, of course, our in vitro diagnostic device data standards, we work on those to enhance real-time infectious disease and AMR surveillance. And then finally, the fourth prong, regulatory science. We continue to work here with our colleagues in the interagencies. CDC and FDA have an antimicrobial resistance isolate bank. So we're collecting a lot of information there that can be analyzed and accessed. We have a database for reference grade microbial sequences. We've also launched an effort we call Resistome Tracker. And so this is an interactive research and data visualization tool for antibiotic resistance genes. And we have our national database of antibiotic resistant organisms at our National Institute of Health. NARMS Now, I mentioned, is our national program for looking at antimicrobial resistance surveillance. We publish that information. And Genome Track. So this is really interesting network. We have more and more countries and partners that are joining us and uploading sequences to this network. And this is a really valuable tool, I think, going forward to help combat antimicrobial resistance. Okay. So what are we doing specifically on food producing animals? What's happened since the last time I talked to you last year? So right around that time, we had released a concept paper. This concept paper talks about a potential approach for ranking of antimicrobial drugs according to their importance in human medicine. So one of the things that we do when we evaluate medicines for authorization for food producing animals is we look at qualitative risk assessments. So we have a guideline that we published in 2003 that outlines a framework for how we might take into account that qualitative risk assessment information. And this concept paper represents the first major update to this framework, potentially, since we released that guidance. And so in that guidance, we talk about medically important antimicrobials, so those that are important for therapeutic use in humans. We use that term to distinguish from uses like production purposes, like growth promotion, weight gain, feed efficiency. That's a really important risk management term, medically important antimicrobials. And within that group, we further break it down into critically important, highly important, and important different antimicrobials. And so that will sound familiar if you think about the WHO list or the OIE list of antimicrobials of veterinary importance. That's a qualitative approach to looking at the relative importance of these drugs and subclasses within human medicine. And so one of the things we do at FDA is we publish these concept papers to share our thinking about how we might update our frameworks. And so about a year ago, we published this concept paper, and we have extended the comment period. So we allow folks to come and comment on that. And so we've actually extended the comment period a couple of times so that our stakeholders can give us some input on that framework. This framework goes a little bit further and actually develops different tiers relative to the impact of different antimicrobials on public health. And so it's a potential approach that we might use in the future that sort of refines and goes beyond critically important, highly important, and important antimicrobials. And so I would encourage you to take a look at that framework, and certainly we'll be talking about that in the years to come. So what's another thing we've done? So we have continued to publish our NARMS data. I mentioned this. Again, here are our partners, CDC, USDA, FSIS, and we publish this information on our website. We have an interactive data visualization tool. You can go on our website and actually look at some of this information, look at trends over time. You can look at different breakouts by antimicrobial classes or subclasses. And so this is something that we've continued to publish for a number of years now that we think will be a very valuable resource. And of course, now we have, in addition to our integrated summary, we have NARMS Now, which features genomic data and predicted resistance. So it's really amazing what we can do, I think, with some of the genomic information, if you think about where we've come from antimicrobial susceptibility testing methods. So in December of last year, probably pretty soon this year, we will publish our annual update. In addition, for surveillance, we publish a report on antimicrobials sold or distributed for use in food-producing animals. So as Dr. Thompson mentioned, we have a variety of ways that we collect this type of information. We collect primarily sales data as reported by our industry to support this report. But we recognize that that is somewhat of a surrogate for what might actually be used on farm. So we do, talk in the report about some of the challenges about using some of these high-level numbers versus what might actually be used on the farm. And so this report shows domestic sales and distribution of medically important antimicrobials. Again, remember that there are a lot of substances that are out there with antimicrobial properties. A lot of our stewardship and our surveillance efforts are directed toward medically important antimicrobials for use in food-producing animals. And so what we saw in this most recent report is we actually had a small increase by about 3% from 2018 to 2019. However, the trend over time that probably reflects all of our ongoing stewardship areas to support antimicrobial stewardship indicates that sales and distribution are actually down 25% since 2010 and down 36% from 2015, which actually in the United States represented peak year of sales. So you'll recall that last year I talked a little bit about our voluntary program where sponsors were able over a certain time frame to move medically important antimicrobials to veterinary oversight. And so I think some of the trends that we see are in response to some of our stewardship efforts. Okay. Go to the next slide. In January, we published a concept. So we developed these concept papers and put them out so that we can get early input on different frameworks. So one of the other things that we've been working on are those products that are approved that still need a defined duration of use. And so we've approved a number of different antimicrobials over the years for use in food-producing animals. Some of these approved some time ago did not have a defined duration of use. And so, as you know, with respect to antimicrobial resistance risk management, one of the things that's critically important is using the appropriate dose for the appropriate duration. And so we have developed a concept paper which outlines a framework where these sponsors, again, can make voluntary changes. We've actually had really good success in being able to lay out a framework where animal drug sponsors can make voluntary changes in their label. And so this is a framework that would help them to make voluntary changes to the approved conditions of use to establish defined durations for those indications that may currently lack those. And so we published this in our Federal Register, and you can take a look at this concept paper. Another area of stewardship that we're working on is changing the approved marketing status of certain medically important antimicrobials from over-the-counter to prescription. So we had some antimicrobials that were able to be purchased over the counter, and many of those changed previously with some of our efforts, but there are still a few that can be potentially converted from over-the-counter to prescription use. And so this is a guidance that we've finalized that outlines the process that we're doing it. And so once this transition is complete, the animal drugs containing medically important antimicrobials can only be administered under veterinary oversight and only for therapeutic purposes. And so that would be for assuring the health of animals, so for treatment, control, or prevention of specific disease. And with that, that's my update on science and policy. So here's where you can go to the FDA website if you would like to get some more information about some of the things that I mentioned. And I'll speak just a moment about the Codex Alimentarius Task Force on Antimicrobial Resistance. So just recently, just a couple of weeks ago, we met in the final session. This is a task force that was envisioned to go 4 years. And we've been working on 2 documents to update and revise the code of practice to minimize and contain antimicrobial resistance. This is a collection of risk management measures that previously in 2005, was adopted for food-producing animals only. The mandate to the task force was to expand this guidance all along the food chain. So in other words, to expand it to the plant crop sector, as well as to expand to food processing, distribution, and retail. So there's guidance all along the food chain now in this expanded and revised code of practice. So we had a number of countries working on this. We had 2 electronic working groups working on this document, as well as guidelines on integrated surveillance and monitoring. And so we had a couple of countries, China and Chile, that participated in as one of the co-chairs on both of those electronic working groups, together with United States, Netherlands, Kenya, United Kingdom, and New Zealand, I think, are all the different co-chairs for the different documents. So at this last task force meeting, the revised code of practice to minimize and contain antimicrobial resistance was recommended for adoption at step 8. The Codex Alimentarius Commission will meet next month to potentially make a final adoption of this guidance. And again, it contains very important risk management tools, such as the use of critically important microbials, WHO and OIE. It includes the One Health concept. It contains some very new definitions for plant health professionals, as well as definitions such as food production environment. So there's a lot of new AMR risk management tools in this guidance. And then as well, there are guidelines on integrated surveillance and monitoring of foodborne antimicrobial resistance. So recalling that Codex Alimentarius Task Force is really focused on food. And so these are guidelines that will complement the work that's already being done in OIE and in other venues on integrated surveillance and monitoring for foodborne antimicrobial resistance. So I thought I would take the opportunity to share that information with you. It's a very long road. This has been 5 years worth of work that will hopefully come to a conclusion here next month. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your time and attention today.
I wonder how can you still stay awake in the middle of the night or early morning, too early morning. 好，
The next speaker will be the government rep from Germany. This is Chief Vet Officer Director, Animal Health and Welfare, German Federal Ministry of Food and Agriculture, Dr. Dietrich Russell. His topic is integrated surveillance of AMR, and we hear One Health again. So over to you.
Hello. Good afternoon. Beijing. And I hopefully I'll be able to start. Give me a signal if you cannot see the screen here. Yes, my presentation. My presentation will cover.
We could not see you, so we could not see you. They're trying to sort it out.
Can you see my presentation?
we cannot see you on our screen.
Okay. Wait a minute. Oof. I'll try again.
So did you turn on your video or your camera?
Yeah, I'm.
So please open your screen.
Can you hear me? Can someone from your side open the presentation? I forwarded the PowerPoint to you. Can you open it from your side in Beijing?
We can hear from you, but not.
So please wait a minute. We are projecting your slides now.
是的。
Well, I'm sorry. It's Zoom does not recognize my camera. So I'm sorry if you could maybe could give me another slot for the presentation.
Can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Maybe we can control the PPT for you.
Okay.
If you can see,
No.
because we can hear from you.
Okay, fine. Now let's start. Can you go back, please, to the outline? Okay. So, yes, thank you very. Maybe you without the notes. That would be kind. Just the presentation.
Yes, now we have your slide on the screen, so you can start with your presentation.
Well, yes. If you go back to the outline.
再往前几个，再往前，这是第4章。
Okay. Sorry for this delay. I'm going to discuss to present the following points. I would like to explain the German approach to surveillance of antimicrobial use. I will explain our reasons. I will explain the level of detail. I will cover briefly the recent development of antimicrobial use in Germany. And in the second part, I will briefly highlight a report from the European agencies on the association of antimicrobial use and antimicrobial resistance in humans and animals on our national level. So the next slide, please, the introduction. Perfect. Now, it's evident that this global threat of animal microbial resistance needs to be counteracted, and the most important thing we will see that we collect data. We need to collect data on antimicrobial resistance, and the main driver of antimicrobial resistance is the antimicrobial use. Therefore, we need to collate data on these two factors. And our many investigations worldwide have shown that both antimicrobial use and resistance, they do differ between different production sectors, even within the same animal species. For example, antibiotic microbial resistance in broiler chickens and laying hens differs substantially, and overall data on resistance in chickens only will not help understanding the underlying drivers. So that's why we do cover sector specific data on both. AMU, antimicrobial use, and AMR, antimicrobial resistance. let's go on the slide. So I will briefly outline the German system. Now we will start with the antimicrobial resistance. This is being monitored by European legislation, which is harmonized, and of course our monitoring is in line with that. So we do examine antimicrobial resistance in certain species. This monitoring covers zoonotic bacteria like Salmonella and Campylobacter, and it also investigates indicator bacteria that are considered an appropriate mirror of the antimicrobial selection pressure in each population. So we test E. coli and Enterococci. Finally, selective isolation of bacteria with specific resistance features is included. And the EU prescribes selective isolation of cephalosporin and or carbapenem resistant E. coli. And of course, in Germany, additionally, we also routinely run programs on MRSA in the food chain. Now let's have a look on the right side of this slide, the antimicrobial use. In Germany, we have been setting up an antimicrobial minimization strategy for considerable time, since 2014. This strategy, this program requires meat-producing farmers to record all their treatments in a central database. Twice a year, this data is collated and farms are categorized according to their level of use. The farms with the highest use in the respective sector need to take action to reduce treatment frequency and report this to the responsible authority. So this is basically our system, and let's go on to the next slide. Here you can see an overview of the development of sales of veterinary antimicrobials in Germany, and we recognize that since we have introduced this strategy nationally in Germany, we do have a considerable decrease of antimicrobial use, which is very good, which is very positive development. Next slide. So in fact, we did have a reduction of antimicrobial use by 6% since 2011, and responsible for this reduction has been the introduction of quite considerable new legal regulations, which are fairly strict on the use of antimicrobials in animals. So overall, we have a generally quite a lower use compared to earlier times. This is, by the way, been reported by the Ministry of Growth and online available. However, this progress I have mentioned has been made not in all production types. So let's go on to the next slide. And here you will see a graph which shows you the number, the farm level of therapeutic frequency. So this slide shows you the frequency of antimicrobial use in farms over a certain time, And this graph is differentiated into certain species. So on the left we start with pigs under 30 and over 30 kilograms, and with broiler and turkeys from the poultry sector. And it's not difficult to recognize that there are substantial differences between the sectors. So we were not so really happy about the poultry, the use in poultry. So let's go on to the next slide. So in summary, for this part, we can did successfully reduce antimicrobial use in the last decade. These effects have been due to many legal changes. We find it important that production sector specific data on the farm level are needed, and also production sector specific data are needed on AMR. So having concluded this, we are right now in the process of updating our German strategy of antimicrobial use minimization. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Having said that, we do have an international, a strong international component to this strategy, and we are very much working on intensive collaboration of medical and veterinary science in a true one health approach. And of course, we also have to look into the European data from both sides, AMU and AMR, and compare them with the national data. So we are grateful that EFSA, the European agency, has taken this up and has provided a comprehensive report on this. Now, one point we need to highlight are differences between bacteria species. But let me also mention that this European work has been carried out by EFSA, not only by EFSA, but also by the AMR and by the European Disease Control and Prevention Agency. Right. Now let's go on to the next slide, please. And this is briefly a graphical description of what I've been explaining to you. This is basically the picture. The picture you should keep in mind the interaction between antimicrobial consumption in animals, but not only animals, also in humans, and the development of resistance in both animals and, of course, in humans. Next slide, please. Very briefly, I will not go into very much detail. This is a flow chart which shows that looking at the AMU and AMR to fluoroquinolones in E. coli, we can identify that there is an association of both AMU and AMR within the sector, but no association between AMRs in animals and humans. And in comparison, and now to the next slide, please. If we look at this for a different bacteria, for Campylobacter jejuni, we will recognize that there are both associations of AMR in animals and humans, AMU and AMR in animals, but no association of AMU and AMR in humans. So we do have to look carefully into these interactions. So let's next slide, please. Yes, definitely. We consider a very good impact of antimicrobial exposure in the population. And as I briefly showed, the association of AMU and AMR in animals and humans may differ between bacterial species. So AMR monitoring and AMR attribution needs to consider different bacterial species, of course, including foodborne zoonotic pathogens like Salmonella and Campylobacter. Finally, where should we go to? So please, the next slide. Well, obviously, the digitalization at the moment will broadly widen our capacities to collect and analyze data. So we are hopeful that we will get more insight into the interaction and necessary specific control measures for AMU and AMR. And we will, of course, and this is our recommendation, put a special focus to the highest priority, critically important antimicrobials as assigned by WHO. So this was with a bit some problems technically, my presentation, and it's available for you to read and study. And well, I wish this conference a very good course, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Even though with some technical difficulties, we can hear your whole presentation quite well and understand what you are doing on AMU and AMR in Germany. 好，我们现在休息。
Now let's have a break. We are quite on time. So we can start our next session at 3 p.m. Li Fengqing will be the moderator. Thank you.
大家是不是就做了？喂，大家是不是就做了？
So we can start early because we are afraid of delaying the schedule. So the next speaker is researcher Liu Yiqing from Shandong, and he will give us a presentation. So Ms. Liu, it's Mr. Liu. How do I play my slides? I'd like to thank two professors for inviting me. You see, we have some outbreaks here in Beijing, and it's really a great opportunity to be here despite the outbreak of several cases. Let me talk about integrated surveillance of antimicrobial resistance from multi-source and evaluation of ecological control strategies. So this integrated is about health for animals, for humans, CDC, etc. I'm from Institute of Animal Science and Veterinary Medicine, Shandong Academy of Agricultural Science of China. We're specialized in animals. How do I attend the pages? Okay. I'm doing research in public health, such as the mechanisms of AMR and monitoring, evaluation, and prevention of zoonotic superbacteria. This includes different aspects like worms, vaccine, antibiotic, phage, prebiotics, and traditional Chinese herbs. So we should not rely on antibiotics. We have this vast model as an integrated model. I will cover 4 topics to establish integrated surveillance network. Number 2, we need to have the indicators for monitoring, and it's complicated. I will go to the details later. Number 3, we need to have ecological control. So how to reduce the AMR, and it's a very important topic. And during the 14th 5-year period, we need to control AMR, and there is an expected goal. And look at this. Antibiotics contributed to the lifespan and to the husbandry industry. From 1998, it was 40 million tons. Now it's 80 million tons. For aquatic food, is 60 million tons. So it's really a great number, but it's about safety, and we want to ensure health for our family members and friends. These are superbugs all over the world. They are issues we have to deal with, and they are multiple resistant, and they have high resistance in that industry because we don't control the dose very strictly, and it's not controlled by prescription as we do in hospitals. So it's highly resistant, and this could happen in both animals and humans. So this is a public health issue. Previous speakers mentioned One Health, One World. Different countries are doing everything they can to control AMR. Ministry of Agriculture and Ministry of Health are making the national action plans of China. In 2016, we established a network for looking at the AMR for animal health. In 2017, the Vet Authority of China made the national plan, and the national vet body went to our institute for inspection. They checked out our methods, and they've given us high approvals. On the basis of that, we have made 5-year action plans for the AMR originating from animals. First of all is monitoring and surveillance to look at epidemiology and levels of resistance. The other one is the reduction and piloting programs for reduction. It's not reducing randomly, it's reducing the abuses of an AMU. So it's sometimes you want to use something to play it safe, but you have to manage such impulses as a bet. So we've established a network that covers Shandong province, and this covers all the 16 regions in Shandong province. We've made such a device. It's very practical and easy to use. And the cost is less than 300,000 RMB, but it's easier to use than a counterpart in the hospital. It can have susceptibility test. You can use the broth or another methods. You can use it to screen the bacteriophages. So AMR and screening of bacteriophages can be coupled, and this also can be used for testing bacteriophages and also antibiotics. So since 2008, in our VAMs, we've been operating for over 10 years, and we've accumulated 20,000 strains of bacteria originating from animals. This is more about broiler, layer chicken, duck, pig, cows, etc. If you look at VAMs, we have this database. This database is easy to use. You could choose different regions and different animals at different time points, and you could choose different pathogens. And you can have the queries with different parameters. And this is to look at distribution of MRC, resistance, and the parameters. And also, you can look at the rate of phages, and sometimes bacteriophages will lose its effect, so you have to change for another one. So this is a comprehensive network. We have the national state key project, so we integrate animal health, public health, CDC, and food all together. This is now a loose network, but in Shandong province, we have a more deeply integrated network, and this is used as a piloting program for animals. It's the Institute of Agricultural Science working together with the Shandong CDC, and we have Shandong Provincial Hospital and the China CDC working together. So these networks can be put together. It's not moving. It says I have a very poor connection. Now here it works. I think this was a previous slide. Should we go on? Can we go on with the slide? We need to go back to the slides. I think we are going too far away. Okay, that's the right place. So these two networks are integrated, and this is for the AMR in animals. This is about E. coli. Look at the 10-year results. And for E. coli, the red part is the threshold. If it's above the red one, it's AMR. So this rate is 80 or 70%. we have this weighted average of MIC and subdivide that, we get a large value. And we get a large value, it's 8.22. This method is easy and straightforward. Again, in different regions in animals, 8.22 for large. For boiler, we've had 15 batches, and without using antibiotics, LAR is down by large margin, but in hospitals, in patients, it's 1.46, is higher than UCAST. So without using antibiotics, you still have a high number of LAR value. We need to use some new means to deal with the resistant bacteria. From the red ones, you could see these are 5 drugs. They are of low AMR, the LAR value is less than 5. For the lower ones, ampicillin, etc. For the 4 of them, they have high AMR, it's above 10. So it's not high for all or low for all. So for those higher numbers, we'd like to reduce them. And if we can do that, we can reduce the AMR. So during the 14th 5-year period, we have such expectations, but this is not required by Ministry of Agriculture. Technically, we proposed such parameters. Number 1, we need to go on with the rearing and husbandry. They cannot reduce their output. Number 2, EPT. That means for each ton, what is the total volume of antibiotics?
APT is lower than 150 grams, and for cows, maybe it is only 40 or 50 grams. And LAR APT is rather high for chicken and ducks. And LAR should be lower than 8. Actually, it is feasible for a 5-year plan. The LAR index is a rather good indicator, and it can assess the impact of different factors on MR. And LAR is the highest for chicken and duck, and followed by pig, and followed by cows. And the personnel who raise the animals have similar LAR index as the animals. And in different countries, different regions, in different time, and with different intervention, the LAR index can be used. And for the strategies of drug use, actually the bacteria includes a group of bacteria which are changing and mutating. So for the group of bacteria, we should use different methods and approaches to treat, including the herbal medicines, probiotics, or vaccines, etc. And phage can also be used to inhibit the pathogens. And the drugs have a higher and higher resistance. So we need to target a pathogen and have continuous monitoring and use a combination of different drugs. So we should adopt a method of managing a group of medicine or drugs. You are familiar with the phage. It has very rich resources, and it has high efficiency with no residue. and it has no relationship with the antibiotics. And it has low toxicity. We have screened over 1,300 phages, and 4 of them are rather mature. And for others, they are difficult to be isolated. This is a whole process from we obtaining the sample and we separate the pathogens and screen out the phages. And for the whole process, now we can complete the process within 7 days. The farms can accept this time period. And for the use of the phages, actually, it has a rather similar effect as the antibiotics. And we can see that its growth curve becomes lower and lower. And it can inhibit the pathogen at a certain concentration. If we use the phage and the antibiotics together, it has a better effect. For example, the combination of phage and ciprofloxacin can reduce the dose of ciprofloxacin and improve the bacterial effects. And this is the curve for the concentration of bacteria. And we have different phages, and first of all, we treat it with the phages and test its MIC. And after our observation, we found that the MIC has been lowered to different extents. The Pseudomonas aeruginosa the residue strains show different degrees of reduction in MIC. So the AMR is reduced, which is very conducive to our treatment. And this is E. coli, and it's a pre-phage. There are many pre-phages. Each E. coli can carry more than 10 pre-phages. We hope that we can induce that the induced lysogenic phages can be transformed into lytic phages, and it will become probiotics. Such a technical means is equaling to using new drugs. It's very difficult to develop a new antibiotics. So we can make full use of the phages. And we can also carry out a comprehensive assessment and issue related reports. And this is the epidemiological surveillance laboratory. And we have the phage pilot lab and the phage GMP production line. And we have been very mature in producing the liquid phages, but for solid phages, the technology is not so mature yet. And we have some commercial application now. Our customer, Richmond, is very satisfied with the phage, and we achieved a successful rate of 67%. Of course, we also encounter many problems in using phages. Phages has poor heat resistance. It's very difficult to transport and store. And under the temperature of 90%, we heat it for a half hour. So this kind of phage can still survive. So certain kinds of phage has very excellent heat resistance. And we use the pathogen as a host bacteria in clinical settings. However, the production and use have great risks for the production workers, and for the use of the product, there are great risks. So how to produce the safe strains? We need to remove the toxic strains. So we need to pay attention to the risks. And we have created some strains of the E. coli. And the cross protection of the production strains and the clinical strains is not sufficient. And for the decomposition, only 70% of the strains can be successful. And antibiotics are chemicals. However, phages are active materials, and we need to combine with the epidemiological surveillance. We are actively spreading the technologies about phages, and we also organized several workshops. And together with the domestic and international experts, we formed a partnership. Just as Mr. Chen mentioned, One Health approach. And these are the experts engaged in phage research. And we organized Qilu international lectures every week. We focus on One Health concept, and this is the annual report published in 2020, but it's not available for the public because of its confidentiality, but we can share between our counterparts. I think public health
所说的 One Health， 觉得这个卫生一体化，我觉得就不如翻译成。
This is my presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Liu, for your excellent presentation. Mr. Liu mentioned the surveillance of AMR and also compared the surveillance results. Mr. Liu conducted a lot of work and developed a LAR index and compared different methods and the data in different countries. Now we are using CISA and EU custom methods. However, In China, we do not have our own system to assess AMR. Last week, Xinhe Hospital organized the experts in clinical, veterinary, and health sectors discussing the development of an index to assess AMR. Mr. Liu introduced as the LAR index, which is very good. And the resistance reduction and resistance replacement are also very important topics, especially in agriculture. The agriculture sector, the use of antimicrobials is indispensable. Thank you, Mr. Liu, for your excellent presentation. Our next speaker is a foreign expert. I don't know whether he's online yet. So we still have some time. You can raise questions to Mr. Liu. Do you have any questions? Okay. Since we do not have any question, I would like to invite our next speaker.
About antimicrobial resistance and food safety. Jeffrey, are you online? 他播的视频哈，好，那他播的视频那就。
So we have this video clip, and this is a video clip from Jeff.
Hi, my name is Jeff Lejeune. I'm a food safety officer with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Today, I want to talk to you about this intersection of antimicrobial resistance, food safety, and One Health. Before I get started, though, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my background so you have an idea or perspective from where I'm coming from. I am trained as and I would end up being in period. I don't know how many of you have possibly read a number of these best-selling books about the trials and tribulations, which are often humorous and always country vet and worker deals. That's what I want to do. I help people with their pets and their small farm animals. But as my training went on, it coincided with a couple of global events that were taking place. The peak of the bovine spongiform encephalopathy epidemic was occurring, and a new and emerging pathogen, sugar toxin producing E. coli, was identified in the food chain. I became more and more interested in this and decided to pursue a pathway in food hygiene and meat inspection. I worked in that field for several years until I decided to go back and pursue a graduate degree in epidemiology and of foodborne diseases, where I studied both the ecology and transmission of foodborne pathogens in animal populations. From there, I took a faculty position and worked for almost 20 years in research and outreach, looking at potential intervention strategies to enhance the safety of the food supply, primarily during the stages of primary production. About 5 years ago, I was invited by the Food and Agriculture organizations to come for a short stint and lend a hand with technical advice on antimicrobial resistance. I did that and was only supposed to be for a few short months. And one thing led to another, and I'm still here in their Rome headquarters. With that said, let's move to the text or the primary purpose of this talk about this intersection. I want to give you 10 bullet points about the most important things that you need to know about food safety, AMR, and One Health. Let's start with the first one. Residues are not the same as resistance in relation to antimicrobials. So, and this may be basic for many, but the public often confuses this. Antimicrobial residues are those remaining parts of the drug or chemical that had been administered to an animal or distributed into the environment that one can detect with analytical methods. In contrast, antimicrobial resistance is a trait or characteristics of the bacteria themselves in which they inherit or acquire, and makes them recalcitrant, if you will, to the microbiocidal or microstatic effects of the drugs that are normally effective at inhibiting their growth or killing them. The second point that I like to make is that unsafe food really threatens food security. Food security, by definition, is that all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food, which means meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active lifestyle. Key to this, in this context, is that food has to be safe. Oftentimes we say if the food is not safe, it's not food. And if you don't have food safety, you can't have food security. Therefore, it's fundamental. Foodborne diseases also inhibit our ability to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. 1 in 10 people every year, or about 600 million cases a year of people, end up with foodborne illnesses. Among those, 420,000 people die. Those lives are lost. To put this in perspective, the number of illnesses is about 2.5 times the number of illnesses caused by malaria, and about the same number of deaths caused by that disease. And in perspective, it's about losing the number of people in the entire city of Atlanta, Georgia, within the United States each year. Children are particularly susceptible to foodborne illnesses and death. With respect to our Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030 is a blueprint for achieving a better and more sustainable future, in which there's 17 different goals to reach. Food safety impacts on 4 of these directly: alleviation of poverty, ending hunger, having good health, and also economic growth and development. The third point I want to make is that antimicrobial resistance is a real problem. In fact, when we look at the number of deaths caused by antimicrobial resistance, today it's estimated about 700,000 deaths a year by antimicrobial resistant infections. Models predict that by 2050, if we don't intervene, that number could exceed 10 million deaths a year. This would be equivalent or slightly higher than those number of deaths caused by cancer around the globe. The second thing is that this distribution, we mentioned children being more susceptible to foodborne illnesses, but in respect to AMR, we really have a concern here among low and middle income countries of Southeast Asia and sub-Saharan Africa, where it's predicted that 75% of deaths will occur due to antimicrobial resistance. There is definitely an inequity in the distribution of this problem. And last, it's an economic problem. Cumulatively, healthcare costs over the next 30 years will exceed $100 trillion. That's trillion with a T, if we don't act and mitigate antimicrobial resistance. Here's an example of some of the other impacts of antimicrobial resistance. I mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, but over the course of the next 30 years, 28 million more people will fall into poverty. The healthcare costs are extreme, and this will also impact the ability to trade, which will decrease. Because of its effects on animals, antimicrobial resistance could, in some of the worst case scenarios, reduce agricultural production by 7.5%. This is in face of our growing need to feed a growing population and need for more food. The fourth point I'd like to make is that people get antimicrobial resistant foodborne infections. I don't have time to go through all the examples, but I'm going to throw a couple here on the slide just to show you a variety of food sources, whether it be from fruits and vegetables, from seafood, or from other products of animal origin. Antimicrobial resistance is in the food. Antimicrobial resistant organisms are in some of the food that we eat, and it causes a problem for people that consume that food. So a little caveat, I gave you some numbers here, which are quite high and astounding, but you must keep in mind that not all antimicrobial resistant infections are from foodborne sources. And also that not all foodborne infections are antimicrobial resistant. So how much of this actually comes from food? And that's a really good question. Unfortunately, we really don't have a good answer for you. And in fact, it probably depends. It depends on where you are, what the level of sanitation and hygiene is in the food production, and what antimicrobial resistance are you looking for, and what is the pathogen of interest. One recent paper tried to parse this out a little bit, and I'll show this, what I like to call somewhat of a confusogram, if you will. On the left-hand side, you have the different types of resistance genes encoding for extended spectrum beta-lactamase resistance among E. coli. Now, this is an attribution of these resistance genes in a population within the Netherlands. We can see a large portion of these are attributed to community spread or person to person. But if you look down the list, there are things such as raw vegetables, raw meat, raw pork, and raw chicken, as well as some other things such as person-to-person transmission, occupationally acquired transmission, and transmission deaths. So we need more information here, but it's certainly clear that some antimicrobial resistance spills over into the foodborne pathogens and infects people. Collectively, the number about this represented about 20% in this case. It could be higher or lower in other regions. The other thing I like to mention is this is really a wicked problem, and it requires a One Health approach. Now, a wicked problem doesn't mean just a bad problem. In the policy arena, a wicked problem has a definition, and it's a problem and it has many characteristics. There are multiple stakeholders or players that are involved in the problem. There are multiple causes or drivers of the problem. They are socially complex to answer. They are linked to other problems. As you solve one, you may cause another. There is no one solution to solve the problem. It is often dismissed or kicked down the road to address at a later time because it's complicated. The contributors, this is important, also are the same people that are needed to help solve the problem. And sometimes the different contributors and problem solvers have differing views, perspectives, and priorities. The problem is new and unique. It's unprecedented. We haven't addressed something like this before. There's no simple answer, and it requires a behavior change. Something has to change to make this go away. There's really no stopping point. Once we get closer, there's still going to be more drivers going on, and we still need to continue to try to solve the problem. There's no really right or wrong answers. There's only better or worse solutions that we need to make in terms of discussion and decisions. And finally, we're often faced with any wicked problem with an incomplete data set to make concrete decisions. Now, antimicrobial resistance is one of these problems. Other issues might be like climate change, addressing poverty, this sort of thing. How do we address this idea that inextricably linked to one another, and that if we collaborate, coordinate, and communicate across these disciplines and across sectors, then we are more likely to come up with innovative solutions and untangle this wicked problem and come up with some solutions that we can move forward on. Here's an example of how the environment is interconnected with human health, animal health, and food safety. I read a book many years ago while in vet school, I believe, and the title is obviously quite catchy, Food, Sex, and Salmonella. But the author, Dr. David Walters Toes, describes it as this. Eating is one of our most sensual pleasures in life, and everybody does it. We have to, okay? And when we're selecting portions of our environment, the food that is, and bringing them into intimate contact with our bodies, we are directly inoculating our bodies with food that was grown in the soil or caught from the sea. So we're inoculating our bodies directly. And As in sex, promiscuity in eating habits and ignorance with eating partners can carry with it risk. So the goal here is to reduce those risks, identify them and reduce those risks so that when we do eat, we can enjoy that, it can be nutritious, can contribute to food security, and we can have safe food supply. The sixth point I want to make here is that AMR is a complex problem. And this was embedded in that wicked problem discussion. Now, these formulas that I put up here are kind of arbitrary. I've just made them up, but I really want to give you an example to make a point. When we talk about antimicrobial resistance, there's really three drivers. There's the emergence, transmission, and also the persistence. And in order to combat antimicrobial resistance, we need to address the emergence. We need to stop the transmission of resistance between sectors and within sectors. And we need to stop the persistence of the organism, whether it be an environmental persistence for some reason, or say in a food matrix, stopping the persistence could be a simple factor as intervention of cooking the food, which will destroy the organism and therefore will no longer persist. The other point I want to make here is that we need to innovate all the way from farm to table, or from farm to the mouth, if you will, because factors that take place in one compartment also affect those in the others. The seventh point I want to highlight here is that antimicrobial use drives resistance emergence. So this addresses that first factor that I just mentioned in terms of contributing to the problem. Now, resistance is either acquired or inherited and is driven by selection or co-selection by antimicrobials or other co-selective agents because of the way that the genes are organized on plasmids or within the genome of the bacteria, such that, for example, heavy metals may co-select for an antimicrobial resistance, or upregulation of an efflux pump may give you drug resistance for multiple different types or classes of antimicrobials. And the other thing that's particularly important is that bacteria are very promiscuous. They exchange these blueprints and genes for antimicrobial resistance, and they have no care for not only do they exchange the genes with another bacteria that's in genera, they also can across bacterial genera and transmit in all kinds of different vehicles very long distances. The eighth point I want to make here that awareness of the problem is not enough. Certainly it is important, and there's been certainly some advances in raising awareness, especially in the last few years, about antimicrobial resistance. The UN General Assembly in 2016 had passed a resolution unanimously about the impact and importance of this global health concern, and that how every country needed to take action using a One Health approach to combat it. Awareness, however, at least by some authors, may only contribute to 5% of the solution. There really has to be something else. Motivation. Once people know about the problem, they have to be motivated to do something. Will it affect them? Will it affect their health, their family, their pocketbook? What is their motivation to act? Finally, they have to have the skill set or the tools to be able to do something about it. It's one thing to want to do something, but not knowing what to do or how to do it is a story. And then finally, they have to have the opportunity. That environment has to be available to them so that they can do something if they want to do it. For example, this requires investment, especially in low and middle income countries, LMICs. We need training to raise awareness and training and education to raise awareness and promote motivation. We need to also to give them the skill set. But we really need to build that enabling environment with resources so that they have the tools that they can do something to make a change for the better. Number 9, tools are available. Oftentimes, I mentioned that in wicked problems, they just kick the can down the road to address later. We do have tools at this point that we can start to make an impact on antimicrobial resistance. These tools fall into two buckets. Now, the first bucket are those that are AMR specific. They're designed specifically to address antimicrobial resistance. And these could be tools in governance. They could be tools in like awareness raising or behavior change or management, if you want to call it that, management change or change of practices, whether it be in a hospital or on a farm. And finally, evidence and surveillance. We do, in some countries, have fairly strong evidence and surveillance systems in place, and there's research and development specifically on certain antimicrobial resistant pathogens. Some examples of these things might be to limit the use of antimicrobial growth promotion as a governance tool by regulatory means, legislation. It might mean that AMR stewardship takes place, whether it be in a hospital with prescribing practices or on a farm. And finally, as I mentioned, there are some antimicrobial resistance monitoring programs globally, around the globe. The other bucket includes those tools, again, the same governance, awareness, and evidence tools, but these are AMR sensitive. They're not directed specifically at antimicrobial resistance, but they have an impact on antimicrobial resistance. And the important factor to take home here, if you're taking anything home, is that this bucket of tools is much larger than the AMR specific tools, and they are effective. And we don't have to wait to use them. For example, let's say the governance tools, awareness and evidence, which I mentioned. But for example, hand washing. Hand washing will reduce transmission of antimicrobial resistant bacteria. It also reduces transmission of non-resistant bacteria and viruses and other pathogens. So it's a great tool that we need to promote and have more hand washing done, and it will be effective. So antimicrobial resistance is sensitive to this, but it's not specific. There are a number of other tools, food safety regulations, for example, human and animal and plant disease monitoring programs, not necessarily antimicrobial resistance monitoring, but disease monitoring lets us know when diseases aren't responding to treatment. There's things like food hygiene and sanitation. Sanitation is critical. We stop that transmission, okay? Stop the transmission of non-resistant organisms, but also control institutional infections, prevention and control this in hospital and biosecurity on farm, food and strengthening food control systems at the country level, or maybe environmental protection laws, which limit the amount of discharge that can come from a manufacturing plant or even a microbial resistant antimicrobial manufacturing plant. These aren't necessarily targets specifically at antimicrobial resistance, but they're wanting to mitigate pollution in general, and they have the side effect of reducing antimicrobial resistance. So these are some examples of things. What we need to make sure is that, and I've tried to give examples from all the different sectors, from agriculture, veterinary medicine, plant protection, human health, animal health, environmental sectors, and we need to apply these. We all have our own toolboxes, and we need to apply them simultaneously together to get a synergistic effect to make sure that we combat antimicrobial resistance. So the last thing I want to mention here is there is no time to wait. I've taken this bullet point from the name of a IACG report that was published in the end of April 2019, I believe. We must act now. This is a pandemic that is silent, it's called, it's going on, and we need to address it. The key factor is that there's no one group or organization who can handle this completely on their own. We need to work together, and we need to use a coordinated approach or One Health approach with strong communication and collaboration. And then finally, I'll reiterate the bullet point that I made before, is that our control measures for AMR are both specific for AMR and are sensitive, and a One Health approach gives us the best chance of trying to achieve that goal and solving this problem. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll be available for questions in the dialogue, and there's a website here which you can visit. Appreciate your time. Have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. I think this is the best report. It has a microbial background and it's very professional. CEC is organizing the formulation of two documents. One is the COP document, that is to minimize the use of microbials. And the other document is on the surveillance of AMR, and Jeffrey is responsible for the formulation of the two documents. Mr. Liu and I also participated in the development of the two documents from 2016. FAO, ORE, and ORE initiated the formulation of the two documents, and South Korea took the lead in this process, and they established a task force called TFME and held the 8th session. Now, this project is carried out in a very rapid pace. At the very beginning, we were still discussing some concepts or terms, but this year we achieved a very important progress, and we have entered the 8th step. And the document on the comprehensive surveillance on MR has entered the 5th step and may skip step 6 and step 7 and directly enter step 8. After the two documents are published, then each country needed to comply with the relevant policies in the documents. I agree with Jeffrey's opinion that not all microorganisms from food source are AMR, and not all MR come from food. Actually, they have different sources, including animals, food, and the food processing process, and the human clinical settings, etc. I just want to share with you. Our next speaker is from Denmark, Mr. Rene Hendriksen, professor from Technical University of Denmark, National Food Institute. I would like to show the video for you.
Good evening. My name is Rene Hendriksen, and before I give my presentation, I would like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to talk about the presence and future in surveillance of AMR in zoonotic and commensal bacteria of animal and food origin in the EU. So I'll start just with this quote from the former director at WHO, Margaret Chan, that indicated that AMR is in a crisis and we need to manage this with an urgency. That AMR threatens the very core of our modern medicine, and without a harmonized and immediate action on a global scale, we are moving forward to a situation where common infectious diseases will be difficult to treat. So this was also the reason why AMR was included in the World Health Assembly in 2015, where it was recognized that the impact of AMR is, of course, on human health, but there are also contributing factors and consequences, for instance, economics and others, that goes beyond health, and that there's a real need for a comprehensive integrated approach on a global, regional, and local level in a One Health context, and that this would include different actors and sectors. And one of the ways forward is to increase and strengthen our surveillance. So basically, we have to take a thorough look into what kind of surveillance that we have in place, both nationally, regional, and globally. And there have already been, for a number of years, a surveillance established. So this is just some of the examples with an example of a local surveillance from Denmark, which is, by the way, celebrating the 25th anniversary of the DanMap surveillance program. But we also have, for instance, regional from the EU region, but also the NAMs from the US, and then also a global surveillance with the GLASS initiative from WHO. So we already have some surveillance in place. So in EU, especially in the food and the animal sector, the EU have based the surveillance on legislation. So this is one of the few examples where the surveillance of AMR is embedded in some sort of legislation that regulate how the monitoring is set up and also conducted. So we have just entered the new period from 2021 that would reach to 2027. In the former period from 2014 and 2020, we had a similar surveillance legislation, but it was improved last year for the next 6 years. And I'll give some indication of what it includes and entails. But basically, this is EU legislation, meaning that all EU countries have to comply with the text, since this is the law, and this would stipulate how to conduct the surveillance of food and animals in relation to AMR. So basically, the methodology of the decision is listed in the text, meaning that all member states and should use dilution methods according to the ISO standard. We would also need to use fixed panels of antibiotics, and also the concentration ranges should be used. So basically everything is harmonized. It's also indicated that the methodology being used should, of course, be dilutions, but also MIC values should be interpreted according to the EUCAST epidemiology cutoff values, so ECOFs, and that the member state should use standardized EU MIC panels available from the TREC system, the sensitizer system. In addition, it also indicates that the national reference laboratory should be supported by the EU reference laboratory for external quality assessments, so EQA schemes, exercises, training courses, workshops, site visits, etc. So all of this is described in very details in the legislation, how the national reference laboratory should conduct the monitoring or the surveillance of AMR in food and animals in EU. So basically, this is condensed from the EQA schemes report that have been issued every year since 2006, showing the performance of all the NILs in the EU. And basically, we could see that in 2006, we started with the Salmonella deviation level about 10%, and then we are down to less than 1% right now in terms of deviations. And Campylobacter, it was similarly that we started with a high level of deviations, and then we decreased over the years, meaning that basically capacity building always helped if it's performed. But basically, this means that that in EU we have decreased the level of deviations of the surveillance systems. But this is EU. How does it look if we go globally? So basically, for a number of years, WHO had a similar EQA scheme. Sorry. And these data that have been published entails data from 2000 to 2017, sorry. And here we can see that basically 9% of all the tests conducted globally from this EQA schemes are incorrect. So some are minor deviations, major and very major deviations. But basically it means that that 9% out of all the tests are incorrect. Then you can argue if this is satisfactory or if it's actually good performance. If you ask me, I think 9% is definitely not good. I would definitely want a deviation level similar to what we have right now in the food and the veterinary sector in EU, with around 1.5% of deviations. But it also takes a lot of effort to get there. So basically, you could consider if we should simply change the methodology. So instead of doing phenotypic testing, then we should go genomic. So there have been a number of papers describing that it might be easier and better to go for whole genome sequencing. So basically, we are in the midst of a paradigm shift in surveillance, where we move from phenotypic methods to whole genome sequence-based methodologies. So basically, the advantage here is that it takes less time, and you can also identify the genomes using bioinformatic pipelines for multiple features or epidemiology treats. So basically, if you have the genomes after the sequencing, then you can actually analyze them for various aspects like species. You can do cluster analysis. You can look for virulence factors, resistance, etc. And basically, the beauty is that this takes not a lot of time compared to conventional microbiology. Basically, it's not as easy as illustrated here in this illustration from later reviews. Basically, it's a bit more complicated. I'll go back to that. But it was mentioned in a meeting from the Global Microbial Identifier back in 2011 that is likely, and this is from 2011, that in 5 to 10 years, all clinical microbiology labs would have a sequencer in place, and that it would cost less than 50 euros or 50 US to have a bacterial genome. And that in these 5 to 10 years from 2011, we would be able to exchange large data sets over web-based systems, and that we would be able to create large genomic databases that would consist of genomes of different relevant bacterial strains. So this was set already in 2011. So what do we actually have in place right now in 2021, about 10 years later? Did we actually manage to have all that was envisioned in place? Because if that is so, it would be one of the biggest revolutions since Pasteur. So labs and sequencing. However, we can see that the sequence costs have really decreased. So again, this is already in place. So again, the cost for producing one genome is maybe not 50 euro or 50 US, but it's close to the price. And we can also see that a lot of data has been produced over the years. So we can see that there's a steady incline of the data being produced around the world. So this is also evidence of whole genome sequencing being applied for research, but also in clinical settings. And the reason is that we now have certain workhorses available from Illumina and also Oxford Nanopore. So basically, we have my set have a mini stack that would allow us to have the classes, and the predicted phenotype, if it's resistant or if it's no resistant, and then what genetic background that was identified. So in this example, for instance, this genome contains CMY2, giving resistance to beta-lactams, and it means that it's resistant to cefotaxime. And basically, you can see that it's also the same gene that are responsible for ceftazidime resistance. It's also responsible for cefotaxime resistance and also for ampicillin resistance. So this is how it's operating. Another example is that in this case, the resistant also have a durase A mutation that confer resistance to ciprofloxacin, but also further down, you can see that it also confer resistance to naldexic acid. So that's how this tool operates. And you can click on the extended output further down and get much more detail. But this is a very nice tool, and you can download the database and install it on your own laptop with your own system. So basically, we can also see we have done a comparison between phenotype and genotype, and here we could see that there's a high concordance between acquired resistant genes and mutations and the MIC. So the concordance is more than 96%. And there's also a high level of sensitivity and specificity. This review is mainly on foodborne pathogens like E. coli, Salmonella, also Klebsiella, Staph aureus, Campylobacter, and so forth, Enterococci. And this review go back to 2019, but there have also been other examples where we can see that the concordance is even higher. When we look for more public health related organisms or healthcare associated infections, the concordance is a bit lower, especially with TB and other human pathogens. But for the foodborne related pathogens, the concordance is quite high. So we also have, of course, some potential in sharing data. So this is also in place that we actually have now global sharing platforms where that is available for global monitoring of AMR and pathogens. So it's actually possible to submit and store genomic data in large international nucleotide sequence database collections. And now there's also attempts to also store suitability data. So I know that NCBI and also ENA have created repositories where you can actually also store phenotypic data. But the biggest and greatest barrier right now for global sharing and storing of data is the fear to share the data. So basically now we have a problem with GDPR in EU that it's so difficult, or it's not difficult to share data, but there's a fear to share data because of GDPR. There's of course also some complexity of uploading the data to these repositories. There are some difficulties. We have to admit that. It needs to be smoother and easier. Then there's a lack of appreciation of the data. So some might not think the data have any value, but it would actually have for future backtracing. It could also be for outbreak investigation. It would be needed to have these data available. And then there's, of course, also barriers in terms of access to local or national repositories, in the sense that these might not be accessible in a surveillance or outbreak investigation context. So in the US, they have really started using open sharing. So basically both the FDA and the CDC have now decided to open up for the surveillance data. And this is some screen dumps from the repositories where you can actually see, this is a bit old, but you can actually see from the pathogen detection, that Salmonella enterica, we actually have almost 100,000 isolates or genomes included. So this is definitely one way forward in how to establish a surveillance. And basically, when you submit single genomes, you can actually also see how it's related in phylogeny with the other screen DOM. So pretty neat system that have been set up in the US. So we're trying to do a similar approach in EU. It's much more difficult because in EU, you have to get agreement across all the member states in EU compared to the US, where it's just one decision because there's all the states lab have to comply with how CDC and FDA would decide how to run the system. It's different in EU. All the member states have to get an agreement. But basically, there's two systems. There's a public health system, and then there's a food and veterinary system. So basically, the data provider would, if it's a food or veterinary lab, submit data to EFSA. And if it's a public health lab, they would submit data to ECDC. And then these two organizations would host all the data and protect it from being exploited. So basically, all the data are in these systems. In ENA, data. It would public health data in ECDC to the animal and veterinary data in EFSA. So if there's an outbreak, you would be able to actually compare that between the two databases. So that's how it was envisioned to function. And then the data provider would also be able to look into the repositories for foodborne outbreaks. So this is in the midst of being built. So basically, this is the vision, but it would go into force this year. So again, the future in EU is definitely moving in a genomic way. So there was a technical specification coming out from EFSA that indicated the vision of using whole genome sequencing in Europe. And some parts of this technical specification in the harmonized monitoring was included in the new decision from 2020. And basically, this is a very busy slide, but this shows how the monitoring in the veterinary and food sector is being implemented this year and the next 6 years. So basically, for the specific monitoring, in the top, you have the sample, and then there's the routine monitoring of Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, and MRSA that goes for phenotypic testing. But on the other side, you also have the specific monitoring of ESBL, AMC, and carbamate producing E. coli. And here, there's now an alternative method. So the member state can choose to do whole genome sequencing instead of the phenotypic testing, and then submit genomic data to EFSA. So this is very new, and this is really exciting that the European Commission agreed to this with the member states. So now we have taken the first step in a genomic surveillance of AMR in the food and the veterinary sector in EU. So basically, the vision is that in the coming years, we have decided to allow whole genome sequencing for the specific monitoring. And then in 2026, we would take a decision to hopefully make it mandatory and phase out the phenotypic testing of also the indicator commensal E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter, and conduct whole genome sequencing. But as I said, this is a decision that all the member states have to take. But I cross my fingers because I'm pretty sure this is the way forward. So we have already some examples of building capacity for using whole genome sequencing in Europe. I was leading a project some years ago called Engage, where we actually managed, I have put it in bold or in highlighted it in the text, that in the project period, Engage has shown that it's possible to implement whole genome sequencing and use bioinformatic tools in laboratories without any prior knowledge of whole genome sequencing. And this was actually done in 2 years. So basically, we help countries without prior knowledge. And in 2 years, we have established the capacity, and they were doing whole genome sequencing in routine. And right now, I'm building the same in Africa, in 4 countries, in Tanzania, South Africa, Nigeria, and Ghana, where we have established regional whole genome sequence centers. And we have now sequenced almost 10,000 genomes, and with the Fleming Fund supported by the UK aid. So again, this also shows that it is really easy to establish and move the capacity forward with the right funding and the right capacity. But it needs capacity building, that's for sure, but it is feasible. So what is the next step in 10 years? We are currently working on metagenomics. So there's already been a number of papers coming out where we have tried to collect urban sewage water and detect resistant genes in these matrix, but also fecal matter from slaughterhouses and boilers in 9 European countries. And basically we can see that it is definitely feasible to do. But again, metagenomics is probably not around the corner in the next couple of years, but I would assess or guess that in time, from 10 years from now, we would also start doing metagenomics for our surveillance of AMR. So basically, in summary, in the last decade, we have seen that whole genome sequencing have entered mainly research and academia, but also diagnostics with almost real-time data generation. We can see that it's definitely a realistic alternative to conventional phenotypic suitability testing methods for also surveillance. It's now been assessed and proved by research, and there's this very large added value of whole genome sequencing to extract additional information from the genomes to improve and understand the emergence of high-risk clones and AMR. We can also see that the infrastructure is in place in many regions, but it's also feasible to create, and that we are ready for a more full rollout of the paradigm shift. But of course, we need to build the local capacity in the member states. But the incentive is to qualify for research grant. So basically, we are in the area where those that have not started whole genome sequencing will fall behind and not qualify to get grants, where those that have started doing whole genome sequencing will be those that will qualify, because now the call text in many grants would be based on whole genome sequencing, or would indicate that there's a need to do whole genome sequencing. Data sharing is easy, but we face still major challenges in EU because of the GDPR. Right now, there's still a current methodology of phenotypic suitability testing that is the golden standard, but we are convinced that whole genome sequencing will be the future, at least in EU. We can see that we have now been tasked both by EFSA, but also by ECDC to start doing and set up capacity building for labs in both the public health and in the veterinary and food sector. So for the next 4 years, DTU would start building the capacity for both Salmonella and E. coli and Campylobacter in local public health laboratories, but also for healthcare associated infections, such as in Klebsiella for ECDC, and at the same time expand more for building the capacity in member states from the Commission and EFSA. So I hope that you can see that this is the way forward. for the future surveillance of AMR based on whole genome sequencing. So thank you for your attention, and you are always welcome to send me emails if you have any further questions. And again, thank you, and I wish you a nice evening and really a nice discussion for the rest of the conference. So thank you and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
This is a video clip, and we thank the speaker. It's a lot of information. We've learned a lot from René's presentation, and could feel that in Denmark, they are doing a lot of great research, and it's cutting edge. And compared with China, in terms of research into methodology, I would say we learned a lot here. In terms of testing of AMR, whether it is phenotypic or genotypic, they've done a lot of study in Denmark. As René said, genome sequencing is a system where they established WGS. This is from CIFSQ, and also the CDC has their system. But testing is the golden standard for whole genome sequencing and meta-genomic testing. This is the right direction. I say in China, we've done a lot of research as well. So in terms of AMR, and if you see in the new AMR prediction, whole genome testing could contribute its part. I thank René very much. We'll have the last speaker is Professor Liu Jianhua from South China Agricultural University. And is the founder of MCR1, and he's done a lot of work in this regard. Professor Liu will talk about MCR1 NDM and its features and drivers. So is he online now?
Please give the presentation, Madam Liu. Thank you for inviting me here so that I have the opportunity to exchange with you about the resistance of bacteria in food-producing animals. And today my topic is the characteristics and the drivers of the spread of MCR1 and the blood and DM genes among enterobacteria from food-producing animals in China. And as we know that the AMR has caused global concern and seriously affected the public health and caused huge economic losses. I'm sorry, I forgot to share the screen. The topic of my presentation is the characteristics and the drivers of the spread of MCR1 and the blood and DM genes among enterobacteria from food-producing animals in China. We know that the AMR has caused global attention and affecting public health, causing huge economic losses. And the food-producing animals are important sources of resistant bacteria, and they threaten the human health. And among the resistant bacteria, the bacteria which receives the most attention is the MDR gram-negative bacteria, and it is listed as the highest priority with the need to research and develop the anti-resistance bacteria. The main reason is that such bacteria can cause serious infections, and the reason why the MDR gram-negative bacteria develops so quickly is that the plasmids play key roles, and such resistant genes of the drugs can be transmitted through plasmids, and the plasmids transmit very rapidly, and they spread in the environment, and they also horizontally spread in the intestinal tract and environment, leading to the rapid dissemination of the resistant genes in the whole ecosystems. The next, I'd like to introduce you the characteristics and drivers of the plasmid mediating resistant genes in the environment. And colistin was started to be used in clinical settings since the 1950s, and it was replaced by other drugs due to its high toxicity, and it has become the life-saving drug in clinical medicine and received a wide attention in the international community. And in the past, it is believed that the resistance mechanism of the colistin is mediated by the chromosomes, and there is no transferable resistance mechanisms. According to our surveillance results, the colistin resistance rate of the E. coli from animals was quite high and on a rise, and it can be as high as 60% in pig farms. And we selected a resistance bacteria strain from pig farm and found the gene for the colistin resistance mediated by plasmids, which is named MCR1. And after the discovery of MCR1, we screened the genes, and we detected MCR1 in food and animals, and the detection rate is rather high with a year-on-year growth trend. And we discovered that MCR1 is the main reason for the colistin resistance. According to the literature report, we have identified MCR1 in the E. coli from the food-producing animals in the 1980s in China. And after 2008, colistin showed a year-on-year growth with the increase in the animal use. MCR1 is widely spread globally through several plasmids, especially Inca I2 and Inca X4 plasmids. And the Inca I2 plasmids carrying MCR1 have been detected in over 50 countries and regions, and Inca X4 plasmids carrying MCR1 have been detected in over 40 countries and regions. Due to the harm of MCR1 and its widespread globally, the experts and governments expressed their concern on the risks of colistin in animal use, and EMA initiated the reassessment work of colistin in February 2016 and planned to reduce the distribution and sales of colistin by 65%. Chinese Ministry of Agriculture published an announcement deciding to prohibit the use of colistin in food-producing animals for growth promotion, and it is also prohibited in Japan, Thailand, and Brazil. WHO adjusted its priority as the important resistant drug from important to critically important. And the changes of the policies have great impact on the colistin resistance. According to the survey in China, the production and the sales volume of colistin reduced by 8 times. And we also investigated the changes of colistin and MCR1. And we found that in 2016, there is a gradual increase in colistin use before 2016. And after that, there is a significant decrease. And we also discover a significant decrease in the colonization rate of MCR1 positive E. coli in healthy human feces. And the colistin resistance in E. coli in patients, hospital patients also showed a significant decrease, not only in China, but also in other countries. They have similar discovery. The detection rate of MCR1 in a Portuguese slaughterhouse also decreased after discontinuation of using colistin. The above data show that the colistin resistance and the carriage rate of MCR1 are caused by the high selective pressure of colistin, and showed that the animal source resistant bacteria have impact on the resistance of healthy people and patients. And we also identified the scientific rationale behind the impact of the colistin resistance. We also discovered that MCR1 in wild animals also is also caused by MCR1, and we discovered the reason for the significant decrease of the MCR1 in wild animals. Another example is MDM genes, and it was discovered in 2008. It has been spread across the world. In China, in 2008, we also detected NDM, and in recent years, the detection rate of NDM has been increased in animals since 2015. The animals and food-producing animals also showed an increase of the NDM. At present, over half of the regions in China have detected NDM. And the carbapenemas genotypes are almost NDM, and with a very low existence of KPC and OXA48. No matter for the food-producing animals or the animal food, the transmission carrier of NDM is mainly the Inca X3 plasmid with about 80%. And in 2015, our laboratory detected that 11% of NDM from the E. coli of 3 chicken farms in the Southern Chicken Cooperative and also detected in 2016. And we want to understand the transmission characteristics of NDM in such chicken farms, and we collected samples, including the samples from the chicken feces, the drinking water, the walls, the agricultural field and the water, etc. And the results show that the NDM dissemination existed for consecutive 7 years in 3 chicken farms, and the carriage rate of NDM in chicken feces is as high as 90%.
So this has NDM5 in the feces, and if you see the strains, it's E. coli, Klebsiella pneumonia, and other enterococci. And for the NDM generating strains is E. coli taking a dominance. And NDM1 is more pervasive. In the chicken feces, NDM positivity is more in E. coli, and but in the environment, it's more diverse. If you look at the same chicken group, you see these are commons, but the same clone does not persist in the same coop for over a long time. But if there is positive bacteria in different chicken coops, there are, you see, this happens in 2 farms. This happens in the feces of chicken as well as environment. And Inc. 3 is the major plasmid, that is the carrier. After some investigation, we found the use of antibiotics. They don't use carbapenems, and why there is NDM, and why this NDM is so popular in those farms. These farms are very crude, and they keep the chicken on the floor, and they don't change their bedding, and there is pollution of bedding, drinking water, and so there is a very important means for dissemination. And the sewage water will be discharged to the farmland around it, and then this resistant bacteria could spread. Furthermore, biosafety and environmental safety has not been managed well. When there's no chicken, or after half a year, we've tested the surface of the floor and water, and water and drinker, we've identified NDM positive bacteria. You see, even there's no chicken, these bacteria are growing and they could be persisting. And when there's NDM positive bacteria, it could stay there for a longer time. But for the long-term persistence and also the molecular MOA is not sure, we need to do furthermore studies. So MCR1 and NDM have been widely spread in food animals. NDM producing enterobacteria is growing. This is due to colistin for MCR1, but we're not sure about the NDM spreading. We need to educate the farm owners so that they can control the biosafety, the environmental safety, and have better cleaning. In that way, they can contain the spreading of such resistant bacteria. We thank the funding from CIFSQ. I thank my students and collaborators. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Professor Liu. We've had 7 presentations. 5 were from overseas experts, 2 were from Chinese experts. Now we're coming to the end of the session. We thank all experts who join us online and offline. Academician Chen will wrap it up. Welcome. Having a meeting must end with a wrap up. But at this critical juncture, I don't want to talk too much. I just want to say to you, AMR is something I repeated. AMR is the most complicated public health issue in the world. COVID-19 is causing havoc all over the world. It's a big impact. But if we don't pay attention to AMR enough, you know what? The humans and economies will be impacted, and we've seen the impact already. There are methodologies to deal with AMR. Experts were talking a lot. It's One Health in principle. Last year and this year in CIFSQ, when we talk about AMR, the difference is that in this year, we strengthen the point of One Health. It's about humans, animals, environment, and food. We need to work together to make sure it is One Health. It's not doing things on our own. There should be a top-down design, and there is division of labor. And this takes time. So I hope the presentations today could inject new life into the containment of AMR in China. I thank all the participants who join us online and offline. I also thank the two interpreters who are in that room. No matter how many people are there, how many are online, offline, those two interpreters are working hard and they don't stop. I wish you a happy day. That's all. Thank you.